It's great to be back in Texas. My most recent foray was a few months back in San Antonio to watch the Florida Gators win the NCAA basketball championship. That was it didn't look very good for the first, probably 95% of the game, but somehow at the end they were able to do it. So up from San Antonio here to Dallas, and for those of you who know country music, I will say Fort Worth is always on my mind. And at some point, I'm going to get to Amarillo by morning, so we'll see. It's interesting. I met some of the legislators, for the state freedom caucuses, and just so you know, the Freedom Caucus in Florida, it just resides in the governor's office, and so that's really all they've needed to do. We just had another victory over a leftist judge, but also over the media, about our deportation facility called Alligator Alcatraz down in the Florida Everglades. And Tom Homan's here, and Tom's been amazing to work with, and he actually believes in the president's mission and fulfilling the mandate, and not everybody in the bureaucracy, unfortunately, works as hard as him to do it, but he's been great. So we work together. They're like, we need more space, and in Florida, they didn't have a lot of space. So we build this facility. It's an airport. There's a runway. You get them in, you process, you drive them 2,000 feet, and they're gone. And we had a leftist judge say, you can't do that because you didn't do an environmental impact statement. First of all, state government doesn't have to do that. And so the media was like, they built this and now it's closed. I'm like, it's not closed. We're still doing it. We still have detainees. Deportations are continuing. But I was like, we've been through this song and dance before. Every time I get out of bed in the morning, I get sued by the left. You can't be worried about getting sued. You know that's what they're going to do. And they go to liberal judges, and we know based on the judge, we have no chance in the trial court. And so we know we'll just win on appeal. So that's exactly what happened with here. So the deportations are continuing. In fact, we also opened a deportation depot up in Northeast Florida, right outside of Jacksonville in Baker County. That's going to be 1,500 beds. And I tell people, there is no truth to the rumors that were circulating online that our Northeast Florida deportation depot is going to be used to house unruly Georgia fans during the Florida-Georgia game. That's not happening. Don't let anyone tell you that. We're not doing that. So we have that one that's now operating. We're about to open relatively soon. Florida's a big state, Northwest Florida, Panhandle. We're going to open a Panhandle Pokey, and we're going to get that done. And then we're even going to do some more. So we're on the team here, and I think it's really, really important. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But I can be here today, and Andy talked about, you take Florida, which was the most competitive state politically in this country for decades. Every race last decade, 2010, 12, 14, 16, and then my election in 18, 1-point races, sometimes less. Mine was even less. And Florida was like, it's this delicate balance. And I'm here to tell you, we then said we win this big 20-point victory. What that shows you is that bold conservative policies work. That's what it shows you. Because I was told, so you get in, it was a close race. We had a U.S. Senate race, which was like 0.1% that the Republican won. We lost the agriculture commissioner race to a Democrat. And so people were basically telling me, look, it's a tough year for Republicans. You did it, but just make sure you're going to have to trim your sails a little bit here. This is a very delicate state. The balance is delicate. You can't afford to lose 50,000 votes going forward because then you can't get reelected. And, that may have been good advice. It was advice that I rejected because I didn't get in there to be mushy on policy. I knew what I believed. I told people what I was going to do. And my view was, I'm sitting at the desk the first day I was governor. I looked around the office, no decorations yet. It was empty. And I said, I don't know what SOB is going to succeed me in this office, but they are not going to have anything to do because I'm getting all the meat off the bone. Anything I can do, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get it done. So that's been the posture that we've had. And The entire time I've been governor, I have not taken a single poll about any issue. Not one time have I done that. And the reason is I don't need a poll to tell me what I believe, but I really don't even think polls are useful to tell me well, they do suck, that's true. Especially the corporate media polls, very bad. But they also aren't, to me, even indicative of what the public thinks, because the public may have a reaction on some issue, but that's a static analysis. The question that I have is, if I chart the vision, if I as the leader set the course, and I deliver the results, even if the people weren't with me at the start, that doesn't matter. They'll be with you in the end when you get the job done for them. That's the mentality you got to have. So if you look at, the state of Florida, we're the third largest state. It's always between us and Texas as to who is the lowest per capita spending of all 50 states. And we bounce back and forth. So we're one of the two lowest levels of spending in all 50 states. The budget that we are operating in today is less spending than the budget we operated in the year before. And that budget was less spending than we operated the year before that. So 3 years in a row. The state of Florida, now, I mean, Texas has had an influx. We've had an influx. When I got elected, we had about 21 plus million. Now we're 23.5 million. We have 4 million more residents in Florida than New York, which is our closest state population-wise. And yet, even with 4 million more residents, our budget is less than half of New York's state budget. And yet, we have better roads, we have better schools, and we have better services. I would much rather go to the DMV in St. Augustine than in New York City. I think you're going to end up better off doing that. So, you've seen that. We have, if you look at the entire history of Florida, we've been a state for 180 years, and you take all the debt that was accumulated over Florida's entire history, just since I've been governor, we've retired almost 50% of that state's historical debt. We now have the lowest per capita debt of any state in these United States, and we're proud of that. We also, of course, have no income tax. Texas has no income tax. There's a handful of the good ones that don't. I tell some of these other states and some of the legislators here, if you're in a region of the country where everybody has income tax, the smartest thing you could do is just eliminate your income tax. And they say, oh, well, we won't, where do we get the revenue? Where do we get the revenue? Trust me. If you are in a sea of states with income tax, businesses will flood in, people will flood in, people change their behavior based on what the policies are. So I hope we can add more states without a state income tax throughout these United States. So from a fiscal perspective, AAA credit rating on from all the rating agencies. Federal government wish it had that. They're not even really that close. And if you look at what that's done for our economy, we've been rated #1 economy of all 50 states 3 years in a row by CNBC. Trust me, CNBC does not want to rank Florida #1. They have to because the data speaks for itself. So less government, low taxes, being willing to cut spending. We actually do spend on things that matter. I'm building roads, I have to build schools, all this stuff, but that's what I think people expect government to do. But that has led to having one of the strongest economies, certainly the strongest economy in the history of the state of Florida. You also look at us taking on the issue of education. And yes, we have universal school choice, which we enacted under my tenure, which I'm proud of. But really, that was, to me, important, but it was not sufficient. Because what we had seen over the years is the left had taken control of our K through 12 system. And the teacher unions had called the shots in our K through 12 system for so long. And so even with universal school choice, the vast, vast majority of students in Florida would still choose to go to their local school. That's just the way it is. We have more choice options and more kids in choice programs, but you still have a lot of people in those schools. So I'm just like, I'm not going to say we have school choice, and so I don't care about the rest. And so we have to make sure that our school districts, one, respect the rights of parents to direct the education and upbringing. And we were one of the first states to enact a Parents' Bill of Rights. We also enacted curriculum transparency. You as a parent have a right to know what's being taught in your kids' schools. And in some instances, stuff is very, very troubling. We also had to fight some, pretty significant battles, including against a company that had a very famous reputation in Florida, that has a big footprint in Central Florida that many people visit, about something that was, I think, really sensitive to a lot of parents. And we had to put a line in the sand. We had to stand up to the most powerful corporation in our state, yes, because in Florida, and I say this as a dad as well as a governor, every parent has a right to send their kids to school without their kids being taught that their gender is a choice or that they were born in the wrong body. We stood up for what was right, and we were able, and people told me, because when Disney got involved in this, they had never gotten involved in anything politically in Florida that they didn't win. From the time the parks were established. And so they got people, oh, Governor, you're not going to be able to do it. They're too powerful. And I'm just like, you know what? There is no way I'm backing down on this fight. We are going to get this done. We signed it into law. And really, the rest is history. Yes, we had some more tussles. They had a bunch of subsidies and special benefits. And, we made sure that everyone was equal under the law. We made sure that, we clawed that local government control back away from this one company. And honestly, things have gone much better as a result of that. And so it was an important fight for the well-being of our kids. But I also think it was an important fight for the economy. I'd have some people say, well, corporations should do whatever they want. Why do you care? Well, what was happening at that time is these corporations were pushing woke ideology. I think woke ideology is toxic, whether it's being imposed by a government agency or whether it's being imposed by a multinational corporation. I think it's wrong, and I'm going to stand against it. So we had this, and I think what happened with that instance and other instances is basically corporate executives, I think by and large, didn't want to get involved in this stuff, but they were fearful of the left. They were fearful of the woke mob, and they were basically being told, if you cave to the woke mob, you're never going to get any blowback from the right. And so that was what was happening. Cave to the left, cave to the left, cave to the left. And so this was really the first time in a major way that anybody on the right stood up and said, no, we're not going to tolerate that. And actually responded in kind. And I don't think, we would have seen the wokeness burn out in corporate America the way it has had we not made that stand on the gender ideology in schools. It was very important. So we also recognize. So I was in California recently, and first of all, naturally, amazing. There's so many awe-inspiring parts of that. I thought back to my Navy days. I get sent to Naval Amphibious Base Coronado down outside San Diego, and I was born and raised in Florida. I had really never spent any time in California, and so I show up, I check into the BOQ, and I go into the room and I try to find the air conditioning because I'm from Florida. They're like, you don't need air conditioning here. I'm like, they're just like, open the window. So I open the window, and there's no screen on the window. I'm like, what about the bugs? Oh, we don't have bugs here. And I'm like, man. And I'm like, oh, how nice is this? And it's like it's really hard. You almost have to try to destroy California. California, back when Reagan was governor, back after World War II, even before that, they were usually the top school system in the entire United States. Now they typically get ranked as one of the 3 or 4 worst school systems. What's the reason for that? There's maybe multiple, but I would say the biggest reason is because the school system there is owned lock, stock, and barrel by the teachers union. And they run the schools to benefit the adults in the system, not to benefit the children. So we've seen that happen all across the country. So what we said in Florida is this. We are not going to allow any automatic deduction for union dues. If you want to write a check and hand it, unfortunately in Florida's Constitution they have that in there. You can do it, but no automatic deduction. And so what's happened now is people aren't doing it because they were pressured to check this box. So the number of people signing up is massive decline, and they're now going to be decertified because they can't get 60% to sign up for their things. So if you look at their national conventions, these teacher unions, you would think that this is like just liberal activism having nothing to do with education. It's left, left, left. That's their agenda, to use kids as political pawns to be able to advance their ideology. That has no place in the free state of Florida, and it should have no place in the United States of America. Now, we said, because of some of the battles we fought, that Florida is the place where woke goes to die. And we didn't just say it, we acted on it. We were the first state in the entire United States to eliminate DEI from public universities. No way. We also understood, and again, the left believes that they have the right to control higher education in this country. And so what are some of the problems? Well, you've got a lot of very, very leftist professors. How did they get there? How come it's hard to be a conservative in some of these universities? Well, because everything's hardwired to produce that. So we did a reform in Florida. All tenured professors must undergo review every 5 years and can be terminated for poor performance. That, and you know, we've been able, they've cycled out hundreds of these folks. We had a liberal arts university down in Sarasota called New College, and I didn't know much about it when I got elected governor. When I found out about it, I was like, why are we funding this? It was basically like a Marxist commune, beatniks, left of the left, no grades, small enrollment, weak test scores. And I'm like, you know, why don't we just close this? Well, people wanted it for the community. I'm like, all right. If we're going to do that, we got to do it right. So I filled the board with conservative trustees. They fired the president, hired a conservative president, eliminated DEI, eliminated gender ideology, gender studies, and said, we are refounding this university on being the best classical liberal arts college in the United States of America. And you know what? This was a few years ago. They just got rigged the #1 public liberal arts university in the country. So we're proud of that. But I think if you look at Mendami in New York City, and like we see this guy and we're like, this is nuts. How could this guy possibly end up getting elected to be the mayor of the largest city in the United States and formerly one of the greatest cities in the world? Not so much lately, but in the past it's been fantastic. And I think the answer is the universities with the ideological agenda and the indoctrination have turned out a generation of students that basically talk leftism as almost a second language. That's their assumptions. They never had their assumptions challenged. And so when he says, like, oh, I'm going to have the governors of the city run the grocery stores, they think that that sounds fine. They think that that's good. So the failure of higher ed to do the classical mission has had huge consequences throughout this country already. It's continuing to do it. But I can tell you in the state of Florida, we stand for education, not indoctrination. We are not going to allow our universities to impose an ideological left agenda. The other thing that we led on that I think has been very important, and we see it, honestly, you know, we see with President Trump restoring order in Washington, D.C. People want to be safe in their communities. And that spans Republicans, Democrats, independents. And we had part of it was woke ideology, part of it was the BLM, Part of it was all the things that were happening in a very crazy time in this country. But you had cities defund police. You had states enact soft on crime policies. You had all these things that had catastrophic impact on public safety. Well, in Florida, we believe very simply, if you do the crime, you're going to do the time. We're going to hold you accountable. If you are a prosecutor, particularly those funded by George Soros, please know that if you don't enforce the law, I have done and I will continue to remove you from your posts. We are not going to let people be in jeopardy. There was a story. It was actually on CNN, but I was kind of proud of it. And I don't know why CNN aired this, but they did. So there was this theft ring in New York City. So they were going around stealing a bunch of stuff, selling it, whatever. And I think it was commercial, residential, whatever. And then they would go down to Florida. They'd take the cash, they'd party, and then they'd go back up to New York and they'd steal more. So the CNN reporter said, well, why are you going back to New York to steal if you want to come down to Florida and spend all the money? He said, because when we steal in Florida, they put us in jail. That's why. Sometimes the truth hurts. So that's really, and as a result of our policies, Florida's crime rate's at a 50-year low. And that's just something that, if you can't do safety, you're not going to be successful. But all this is great, and it's great to say, we have conservative values and we're going to do. But you can be a checklist conservative. You can answer all of Andy Ross' questions great in an interview. And look, that's better than not being able to do it. Don't get me wrong. But the question is, those values that you have, that foundation that you're bringing to the office that you hold, how are you going to use that when the chips are down? How are you going to do that when it gets hot in the kitchen? How are you going to do it when the knives come out for you? Because it's easy to do when the wind's at your back. It's easy to do when you're not going to face any blowback. The question is when it gets tough, are you going to double down and do what you know what's right? Or are you going to fold and are you going to cave? And for us, the real first big test we had to face was the COVID-19 pandemic. And, I'm proud to say that of all the things we've done, probably the most impactful was the state of Florida was the most responsible of any entity in this country for dragging this country out of the lockdowns and the mandates and making sure that people could live free. And obviously now we look back and we're like, of course kids should have been in school. Of course you shouldn't mandate masks. Of course that. But at the time, I can tell you this. I've run campaigns, Congress, all these things. I've gotten involved in a lot of very hot-button issues, and I've taken a lot of incoming fire in my time. If you add up all the incoming fire that I've taken throughout my entire career in elected office and compare it to the incoming fire that I received just for COVID, particularly in those early weeks and months, I got more for just COVID than everything else combined. It was international. It was an absolute frenzy. It was hysterical. And I had all this quote-unquote expert class that was saying things that I didn't think were supported by the data and I didn't think were appropriate in a free society. So I got pilloried because I didn't mandate masks. I got attacked because we had beaches open in the state of Florida. And I got raked over the coals because I did an executive order saying all schools must be open for in-person instruction. And the fact is, it wasn't just getting the blowback. Of any decisions I made, I would say those were the best, most positive, consequential decisions for the lives of the people I represented. But I would say those at the time were the most unpopular decisions that I had made. And so as a leader, when you're in those situations, you've got to decide, are you in this to protect your own job? Are you in it to stand up for the jobs and the businesses and the livelihoods of the people you represent? And for me, the answer to that question was easy. I didn't know how the politics would work out. I didn't know if that 35,000 vote margin that I got in 18 would evaporate in 2022 and I would not be able to get reelected. I didn't know how it was going to shake out. But I knew that I was put in that position to do the right thing for the right reason. I was happy to let the chips fall where they may because I knew that I was standing up for people when they needed me the most. And that's the one thing you should expect out of a governor or any executive, to be there when you need them. And you know what happened? Lo and behold, 6 months, 7 months later, everyone's like, oh, why aren't they doing this? Florida's doing it. Why are you? Look at Florida. And then everyone came to Florida, everything boomed, and kind of the rest is history. But those decisions at the time, were not easy to make, but they were the right ones to make. More recently, and I think many people here realize, you can have a Republican majority legislature. That does not mean you have a conservative majority in the legislature. That's just the reality. So I came in, when I first got elected, one of the things I said, look, we've got to ban sanctuary cities in the state of Florida. And what people would tell me was, oh, no, we're worried about the Hispanic vote, all this other stuff. And first of all, I'm like, you got to do the right thing. This is what we told the voters we're due. We got to do it. But what I found out is the stronger I was on illegal immigration, the more the Hispanics approved of it. They didn't want illegal immigration, especially in Miami and South Florida. So we did that. We did a bunch of things, no driver's license. They had in-state tuition. We repealed it. All these different things that we did. Then fast forward to November of 2024, Donald Trump's reelected, in large part because Joe Biden opened the borders of this country to a massive invasion. And President Trump promised that he was going to do something about it. So I saw the opportunity, and people like Tom Homan will tell you, DHS was gutted under Biden. And so when you're doing this stuff to be able to hold illegals accountable and facilitate the deportation, there's logistics involved. You need detention space. You need to process. You need all this stuff. And I knew there was no way that President Trump's vision could be fulfilled if the states and the localities in law enforcement were not willing to be on the team and help. So I called a special session of the Florida legislature, and I said, we need to enact legislation that mandates that all state and local law enforcement agencies actively assist DHS in this very important immigration enforcement and deportation mission. That policy was supported by 95% of Republican voters. There was not a single Republican member of the Florida legislature who ran on being weak on illegal immigration. All of them ran saying they were going to support President Trump's vision. So I called the session, and the Speaker of the House says, oh, it's premature, we're not going to do it, we don't need to do it, and was trying to slow walk it, saying it can wait till regular session. The hell it can. We had 4 years of an open border. The time was now to do it. So we fought that, and so they got a lot of blowback for that. So they ended up drafting a piece of legislation. This just shows you how some of these guys operate. They draft a piece of legislation that eliminated all authority of the governor to assist with immigration enforcement. Because I got stuff, I'm stopping the boats coming in from Haiti, I'm doing Martha's Vineyard trips, I'm doing a lot of stuff, right? And it was all privileged. So they wanted to give it to the Commissioner of Agriculture, who, it's just, it is what it is. That's not the proper role of that. So they were neutering enforcement, basically making Florida a de facto sanctuary state. But get this, they named the legislation the Trump Act, because they thought if they put President Trump's name on it, that voters would be gullible enough to think that it was somehow strong on immigration enforcement. So it passed the House overwhelmingly. They have a supermajority. It gets to the Florida Senate, and I had a handful of warriors that stood with us. We vetoed the legislation, and then we came back a couple weeks later, and we did what we should have done all along, making sure that Florida was the leader in immigration enforcement. And one of those senators at the time is a fellow named Jay Collins, who's actually with us today. He's now the lieutenant governor of the free state of Florida. And Jay, you ain't going to find too many people that are as interesting as this guy. So he was a Green Beret for 23 years. He's the first Green Beret to ever become a lieutenant governor in the U.S. history. He and we're the only state that has both a governor and a lieutenant governor who are military veterans. But so Jay was in for 23 years, Special Forces, Green Beret, did a lot of great stuff. But there's a lot of other guys that do a lot of great stuff, too. The interesting thing about him is he gets wounded. He eventually loses one of his legs. Now, he reminds me he didn't actually lose it. He knows where it is. He just didn't have use of it anymore. And so, you know, he had been in 18 years. He had an opportunity to retire with medical discharge and medical retirement. But he decided that he was going to try to be the first person in the history of Green Berets to requalify for Special Forces with a prosthetic leg. You got to go through the same training. You got to do the same metrics. And so he was able to successfully do that. He served another 5 years on active duty and then eventually retired and came back to Florida. Interestingly, and we ran him for state senate years ago, and he's been willing to stand up even against his own party when they weren't doing what the voters said. Interestingly, when we had the IDF and Iran conflict, you know, Florida, we had a lot of people that were over there. So, you know, they reach out to me. Parents are saying, my kid's over there, college trip or this or that. So I authorized rescue missions in Israel as the ballistic missiles were coming down, which is, you know, great. It was the right thing to do. I'm signing the papers in Tallahassee. Then Senator Collins flies to Israel, gets on the ground, dodging ballistic missiles, rescues many of his fellow Floridians, and we ended up saving thousands of people and getting them out of there while the war was raging. So, and then most recently as lieutenant governor, you know, we had an illegal alien that Newsom gave a commercial driver's license to, and he didn't speak English or know English, and he killed 3 people in Florida. He needed to be extradited back from California, so I sent the lieutenant governor, who I've dubbed the Chuck Norris of Florida politics, to go get him and bring him back. And so he's done that. So I want him to come up here and just say a few words. But the reason why I think it's important is because when the Republican House leadership rebelled, look, people say, oh, they're going against the governor. It's not going against me. It's going against the voters that elected them. That's what they're doing. And so Jay stood strong, and we would not have been able to lead on immigration enforcement. And Tom Homan told me, you guys are far and away #1 for 287G arrests for illegal aliens all across the country. It wouldn't have happened if he didn't have the courage to stand up. So come on up here, say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, it is awesome to be here tonight and to have this guy standing behind me. America's governor right here. He is freaking amazing, guys. But I want to share something here, and I'm going to use some words and some things that I heard in my recent visit out to California. I don't identify as a politician. I do identify as a God-fearing, gun-loving, bacon-eating, freedom-defending, one-legged Green Beret, so you can put that on the record. Now, you heard Governor Ron DeSantis talk about Florida because he knows, we know, that our freedoms aren't granted by the government. Y'all, they're granted by God, upheld by our Constitution, and all day, every day, and yes, twice on Sunday, we will fight to defend those freedoms. Do you agree with me? Now, I had the opportunity to fight for freedom around the world as a Green Beret, and I am so grateful to have been a small part, a tiny part, of an incredible group of warriors, incredible people around the world. But y'all, it is the same mission, it's a different battlefield. You see, I had an epiphany as I was lamenting COVID and lamenting the failed withdrawal and that absolute mess that happened in Afghanistan. And I realized that if I was willing to die in a nation that wasn't mine, fighting beside people I didn't know to defend what we love here at home, why wouldn't I do all that I can right here at home to do the same thing? So I jumped into politics, even though that's not my dream. And guys, that is the next ridgeline. That is where we have to be, because if good men and women don't stand up and fight, all is already lost. And I don't know about you, but I'm blessed to be lieutenant governor. I was blessed to be a Green Beret, but first and foremost, I am a dad and a husband, and I will not fail my family. I will not fail my state, and we are going to fight all day to get this right. Now, the governor mentioned I ran a few things in my time in the Senate. We were there for a few years. I got to run constitutional carry. We got to ban the CCP from buying our farmland, because when your enemy says they're going to do something, you better believe them. I got to codify prayer in sports on the field. I got to run transformative energy policy, removing the nonsense, that green energy nonsense from the Obama and Biden teams. It's amazing to get that out of our state. But what I really want to talk about today is something we all know. With Tom here and our governor behind me, I think it's important to say that we know every state is a border state. And immigration, illegal immigration, is something that President Trump has had given to him as a mandate from the American people to get it right, to fight to defend our people. And you know what? There is no state on this planet that has done more to defend that and stand alongside the president than the great free state of Florida, because this guy had the ability to stand with bold, decisive, focused leadership, even if it meant he had to stand alone. And y'all, we're just getting started. You heard about Alligator Alcatraz. You heard about the deportation depot, and we'll call it the Panhandle Pokey today. Guys, we're going to fight each day, every day. But you know, the governor hit on something. You would think in a state like Florida, we don't have to fight people within our own ranks, people within our own party, that we shouldn't have to do that. You would hope that by now we know what right looks like, because we have a moral compass and it's pointing the right direction. I'll tell you what, I was pretty appalled. I was pretty frustrated to find that people in my party, people who I knew, people who ran on the same things that I ran on, failed to stand up and fight. And then they wanted to name the bill the Trump Act. Y'all, sometimes as warriors, as people who fight to do the right thing, we have to protect those above us. And in this case, Florida protected the president, because that bill was not worthy of what Donald J. Trump has been doing for this great nation. And it was this guy, the governor, and a few small people standing beside him, but we fought to keep that right. And now we're leading from the front with 287G, holding people accountable and deporting people out of the free state of Florida right back to where they came from, because this is our nation. It was, it is, and it always will be worth fighting for. And guys, I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to see amazing warriors, men and women, willing to fight for what matters. And I'm willing to stand up and hear America's governor tell the story about why this is great, why it's worthwhile. So God bless you, and God bless these United States.
Guy's done a great job. He's going to continue to do well. So we've got to continue to be on offense. And I talked about some of the things that we've accomplished. I'm proud of that. And, I had some people tell me, like, you've done enough. Like, what more can you possibly do? There's more to do. We are leading the effort right now across the state of Florida that will have to go on the ballot in 2026 to eliminate property tax on our primary residence. We've got massive revenue coming in to the local governments from tourism, from investment, and all this stuff. It can be done. I just believe that to truly own private property, to truly own your own home, you shouldn't have to pay rent to the government. You should own it free and clear of the government. And we're going to lead on this, and we're going to give the voters that choice. We're also leading on medical freedom. We do not believe that government should coerce you when it comes to medical interventions. You have the right to exercise informed consent and to make the best decisions for yourself and your family, and the laws of the state of Florida reflect that and will continue to reflect that. The other thing we're working on that I think is important, this is a huge conversation, I'm not going to go in depth. I think we need to recognize that there's a lot of changes afoot in society with respect to artificial intelligence. I welcome technologies that will enhance the human experience. I do not welcome things that are going to supplant the human experience. We can't rely on machines to totally take away our responsibility to think for ourselves. And so we are working on an artificial intelligence individual Bill of Rights so that you have the protections against some of these technologies if they run amok. I understand we're in a new world. I understand there's things changing, but I want to be governed by we the people. I do not want to be governed by a handful of oligarchs in Silicon Valley, and we're going to make sure we get that done. And while we're at it, I'm proud of what we've done in the States. I know many of you in Texas and elsewhere have done a lot of good things. I would like to see more reforms in Washington. I would like to see term limits for members of Congress. I would like to see a balanced budget requirement like we have in all the states. And I would like to see them do what Chip is trying to do, stop the insider trading in Congress where they make windfalls on inside information. So here's the thing. Yes, the results are great in Florida. I mentioned the difference in margin. You know, when I got elected, it was 300,000 more registered Democrats in Florida, and we had never had more registered Republicans in state history. That's 2018. Today, we have 1.3 million more registered Republicans than Democrats. That's because people respond to results, and it's important. But what we're doing in the states is we are proving that these principles work, and we are showing how a Republican form of government can be preserved and how freedoms can be protected for future generations. You know, our founding fathers, when they, because we're celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, I think it's important for us to reflect on the inheritance we've received and our responsibilities to make sure that we remain the last best hope on earth. When they signed that Declaration of Independence, they weren't just popping off on social media. They weren't just virtue signaling. They were effectively signing their death warrants. Because if the revolution failed, every single one of them who signed their names would have been put to death. And they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And they had accumulated a lot of, they were successful people in the colonies. They had everything to lose. And what they had to gain was so that we could eventually have a free society. So they eventually win the war. And then they go to Philadelphia to create a constitution. And it's very difficult. And there's a lot of things they have to hash out. But they had studied the history of every republic throughout all of recorded history, and they drew lessons from those. And the one thing, there's only one thing that all those republics had in common over those many, many years, and it was this. Every one of them had failed. And so they understood it fell to them to answer the question for all of mankind. Can people really govern themselves? Can we have a society in which we recognize our rights come from God, not the government, in which we live under a rule of law, not the rule of individual men? Or is mankind forever destined to live under various forms of tyranny? And they understood that it fell to them to make that, to answer that question. When Benjamin Franklin was walking out of that convention, he was asked, Dr. Franklin, did you give us a republic or a monarchy? And his answer was a republic if you can keep it. He understood, and the founders understood, you can have the best constitution in the world, you can have the best Declaration of Independence in the world. These things do not run on autopilot. They require every generation of Americans to step up and defend freedom when it's under attack. And yes, maybe you put on a uniform like Lieutenant Governor Collins did, risk your life. Maybe you're even called to give your life like the people we memorialize in places like Arlington National Cemetery. Maybe you're just asked to do your part in your community. Maybe you're a parent that's going to have the courage to go speak out against things that the schools are doing that are wrong. Maybe you're just exercising your civic responsibilities and supporting good candidates. But everybody ultimately has a responsibility. Our responsibility as Americans is to preserve what George Washington called the sacred fire of liberty. That sacred fire burned in that convention hall in Philadelphia in 1787. That sacred fire burned at a cemetery in Gettysburg in 1863 when our nation's first Republican president dedicated this nation to a new birth of freedom. That sacred fire burned when a merry band of brothers stormed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day and eventually saved Europe and saved the world. That fire burned at the foot of the Berlin Wall in 1987 when a resolute president said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." This is our responsibility, to carry on that legacy and to preserve that sacred fire of liberty. It's not always easy. None of this is cost-free, but it's worth it. And what we are doing in these states by showing that conservative policies that built this country, that our founding fathers believed in, we show that those work and people vote with their feet. That is the best possible evidence we can produce to show people this is the way forward for not just us, for our kids and our grandkids. I appreciate what everybody in this room is doing. The battles are always lying ahead. It never ends. You always got to be vigilant when it comes to defending freedom. But I will tell you this. You look at what we've been able to do in Florida, you should be optimistic that it can be done. It's been done in many of your states. I know many of your states are going to be able to do even more. And ultimately, we are going to preserve this republic. Thank you. God bless you. And God bless these United States of America. We appreciate you guys. Keep up the fight. Don't bow down to the left. Don't let the rhinos win. Let's get it done. Thank you.